and how you can actually use some of the services there. In this unit, we'll focus on Microsoft Azure. Similarly, we'll take a look at what it is, what you can do with it, and then also help you get started in signing and creating up an Azure subscription that you can use throughout this course. So first, what is Microsoft Azure? Well, with Azure, we're going to make sure to have the technologies that is meeting your needs today, but also tomorrow. The cloud is moving very fast, and every week new technologies coming out. So it's about meeting new capabilities now and investing in those on the horizons, like IoT, artificial intelligence, or even quantum computing. If you look at the update or release feed from Azure, you can actually see that every day smaller and bigger changes and features are released. Ultimately, from a developer perspective, it's about being able to build on your own terms with the frameworks, the tools, the open source tools that you want to ensure you have the freedom and the flexibility to be able to work successfully and to be able to deploy your applications with quality and confidence every time. You want to run a Windows machine on Azure? Sure, no problem. What about Linux? Well, you can select between Ubuntu, Red Hat, SUSE, and a lot of more distributions. It's really no problem. Take your pick. Actually, over 50% of virtual machines on Microsoft Azure are running on Linux. Do you like .NET development or Java or Python? Well, it's really up to you. And then let's talk about hybrid. It's about being able to run your private hybrid estate. Technology is sitting in the public cloud, sitting in the data centers, sitting on the edge devices, and all running in a holistic way in a seamless environment. That seamless environment is essential. Otherwise, running that way is going to be expensive, hard, and insecure. And then, last, of course, is trust. Nothing actually in the cloud is more important than trust, particularly when you're talking about the cloud in general. It's about security, about compliance, and accessibility. So let's take a closer look at that. First of all, when you look at the global reach, actually with Azure, we are investing a lot in local deployments. That if you're running in Germany, that you have regions, Azure regions there. If you're running in Switzerland, if you're running in the US, if you're running across the globe in different regions, we're trying to get to the customers. That's not only good from a latency and performance point of view, but also in a lot of cases, it's about security, compliance, regulations. And that's exactly where we are really investing a lot to make sure that customers can run Azure services in their geopolitical regions. Now, once you put your services in Azure, it's very crucial that security is key. And obviously, this is one of the key strengths of Microsoft. We have a lot of full-time professionals that really only focus on security, only focus on making sure that the services that you run on Azure are secure and protected. We're spending over $1 billion per year on cybersecurity investments. Obviously, with all the signals that we're getting from Azure Active Directory, from Office 365, from lots of other sources that our customers are using, customers across the globe are using, we can use these signals to really make sure that we can provide the highest security standards to our customers. Now, talking about standards, in a lot of industries, in a lot of markets, you need to have certain regulatory requirements fulfilled. Otherwise, you're not even allowed to put your services in the cloud. And that's where, again, Microsoft is really investing a lot in working with local governance, working with local regulatory requirements to make sure that we fulfill these compliances. Just recently, when we're now recording this video, we added our 100th compliance offering for Azure. So you can really see that looking at compliance is a core priority for Microsoft, and to really make sure that we can help our customers, no matter in which industry they're in, to run their workload on Azure. Now, building up an Azure region is obviously just putting in some servers. Now, the interesting thing, and this is a slide from a few years ago, when we look at our Azure region in North Europe, in Dublin actually, and you can see here already to really big data centers. So DB3 and DB4, you can see all these cooling units on top, and underneath in these buildings, obviously there are thousands of virtual machines running. Now, for me, the really impressive thing is when I saw this slide for the very first time is that only a few years later, we already built it or added another building, another data center, twice as big, obviously with the latest lessons learned that we had from the previous data centers here, and really putting this into a new offering for our Azure regions, for example, here in North Europe. Well, but that's not all. Just really a few years later, if you turn this whole thing around, then this small thing in the back, that's this data center region that we were just talking about. And within a few years, a lot of new data centers were added. So we are really seeing all this demand from customers in Europe running or wanting to consume Azure services. And that's really where we're investing a lot of money, a lot of investments to make sure that we meet the capacity. Obviously, this is not only done here in Europe. This is really all across the globe where Microsoft is investing heavily in the build out of these data centers. And again, that's for me one of these beautiful things where I see that this combination of SAP and Microsoft really produces beautiful results. We, Microsoft, are providing the infrastructure, are providing some basic services that allow customers to really deploy and run their SAP systems in a secure, in a reliable way on Azure. So if we take a look at what actually then is it that customers can use, if we look at the different cloud service models, in the past, obviously, a lot of customers had their own data centers. Maybe they had their own compute resources running in-house, on the desk and something like that. Now, the first step that we saw with a lot of customers, and that we're still seeing, obviously, is customers are using infrastructure as a service. So basically, you can leverage these huge investments that Microsoft is doing in the infrastructure build-outs, in deploying new regions, and you can rent a virtual machine, so to say. On this virtual machine, then it's up to you. You can deploy your SAP system. You can deploy different solutions there. That's what we see if you, for example, use the SAP Cloud Appliance Library, where within a few clicks, you can actually deploy an SAP system in a virtual machine that is hosted or that is running in Azure, and you can use this. This is something that we see in a lot of training scenarios where customers simply want to quickly spin up an S4HANA system to do some trainings or some development system or something like that. But obviously, we also see this very, very much with customers that are fully using this in a productive environment, that are really migrating, shutting down their own data centers and just doing a lift and shift and putting all their SAP and non-SAP systems in virtual machines on Azure. Now, the beautiful thing is that even if you do this, even if you just leverage virtual machines, there are already added services that help you to protect and enhance the functionalities that you can use when running, for example, an SAP system on Azure. This starts with security, monitoring, backup solutions. So there are a lot of services that come more or less out of the box as a service, as a platform, as a service that you can use. And that's actually the next pillar that I quickly want to highlight. So in addition to the infrastructure as a service, where Microsoft is just providing you with the compute, and then going from there, you are responsible for the operating system, for the middleware, for the runtime, and all of this. When you look at PaaS services, as platform as a services, then we are also taking care of, for example, the operating system and the runtime. So again, examples for this could be the Azure backup functionalities that allows you to back up an SAP system. And you don't need to care about patching the infrastructure of your backup solutions, or monitoring, security. So there are a lot of services that help you to secure and run your virtual machines and other services easier. Then finally, we also have software as a service. So in this level, we're going even one level higher. So here, you don't need to develop anything. You don't need to configure, for example, a backup solution or a monitoring solution. Here, you're really consuming a service. Again, one example could be Office 365. It could be Azure Active Directory as a fully service that you're using. So here we are really switching to a purely service model, and you just consume the service. Again, similarly, if you look at the SAP side, the S/4HANA Cloud Edition, for example, is also a solution where you don't need to care about the operating system, you don't need to care about running and managing the systems, but you can really just focus on consuming the application. So the next thing that I quickly want to take a look at is some of the more concrete examples that we see when we look at these different pillars in Azure. So again, when you start with on-premise, obviously you have your virtual machine. Maybe you even have a physical server that you're running your estate, and that's more or less everything there is. You need to take care of everything else if you want to benefit or if you want to add some functionalities. Now, when we start in Azure, as I said before, we can provide you with virtual machines. But actually, we have already enhanced this concept. So you can also use virtual machines scale sets, for example, that allow you to easily scale up virtual machines. If you can see that a certain load threshold is met, then Azure automatically spins up another virtual machine and another to really meet these high loads. Now, the similar thing is that we provide you with runtimes for containers, that you can run container instances, that we can run Kubernetes services. So now we're slowly going away from the pure infrastructure point of view to more the PaaS offering, where Microsoft, where Azure is providing more and more of this mundane, fundamental services of running and operating, the operating system, patching, monitoring, and all this kind of stuff, to providing really more the services that you can start, for example, just building the application, not worrying where it runs and how it runs, but really focusing on how can I use these functionalities. Obviously, Kubernetes is there a good example where we provide Kubernetes runtimes that you can just use our framework to orchestrate your containers, and then you only need to care about running the applications in there. Finally, when we come to the serverless aspects, that's where you just really develop and use your applications. You don't need to care about the runtimes or anything. You have a function that is only running when you actually need it, and it stopped. You don't need to pay anything when you're not using it. So if you look at certain events that could happen, only if this event is started, only if this event is triggered, can you actually would you actually pay and use these functionalities. Similarly, we have Logic Apps, which is more or less already in this low-code area where you drag and drop certain functionalities, react to incoming HTTP calls or incoming events from a Twitter feed or something like that, and then you can execute certain solutions. In these, with Azure Functions and Logic Apps, you, as a developer, you don't have to care about the operating system or patching the developer runtime or something like that. This is all taken care of you directly by Azure Functions. So how can you get started actually with this? What are the first steps that you can actually use this? So for this, let me actually quickly switch over to my browser. And the entry point is if you actually go to azure.com/free. If you go to azure.com/free, then here you're presented with a quick overview of what this all contains. And basically, you get a 12-month access to Azure for free. There are a lot of services that are completely free. And you actually get, for the first 30 days, $200 worth of credits that you can use to run virtual machines and stuff like that. If you do this, this should be perfectly fine, or more than enough for the coming 3 weeks of our OpenSAP course. So what you'll need to do is just go here to azure.com/free, click on Start for Free, and now you'll need to log in with a Microsoft user, and you will need to provide some information, email address, and so on. You will also need to provide a credit card information. Now, this credit card is only used for identification. We don't charge you. There's actually a limit. Obviously, you can unlock your credit card so that it would be charged, but by default, you just need to provide your credit card to identify yourself. Once you've done this, then you can go to portal.azure.com, which is basically the entry point of your Azure environment. So here you can see that typically you have one subscription. This one subscription is the container for all your different resources. So we create everything, or we combine everything in so-called resource groups, where you, for example, would put in your virtual machines, where you would put in your storage, your network configuration and stuff like that. So that's how you basically get started. And we'll take a closer look at this in the upcoming units. Now, if you want to create something, and you can see here, it's easy to create a virtual machine or application services or databases and stuff like that. If you want to create a new services, just click here on create a resource, and you can already see there are a few suggestions of what you can start, whether you want to deploy a Windows server or an Ubuntu virtual machine. So you can already see that it's not only about running Windows servers on Azure. It's really about Linux and embracing a lot of other open source functionalities to make sure that you can bring and run anything on Azure. So there's a long list of services available, and again, I don't want to go into this. I just wanted to help you get started here with the very first steps. We have additional tutorials, obviously, and also some other links that will help you get started and do the first steps in Azure. In addition to that, if there is a topic that you're very much interested in, there's always, or for most of the resources, there's also a link to MS Learn or some additional documentation that actually help you to get started with these different services. So let's quickly go back to our presentation. And again, this is just a very high level overview of the services. And I have to admit that there's so much on Azure that typically you only focus on certain areas. Whether it is pure infrastructure, whether it is the integration or the AI world or the mobile world, there's so much content there. So that it's definitely worth to spend some time with your Azure subscription, explore some of the services, run through some of the tutorials that are part of the Azure.com learning solutions, but obviously also follow this Open SAP course to really see how the world of Microsoft Azure can be combined with the world of SAP. With this, let me quickly wrap up this. Obviously, in the meantime, Azure is a global service available, used across different industries, across larger and smaller customers. I think there are a lot of things that make Azure really unique when it comes to being very global, very local to certain industries. When we look at the security and compliances aspects that we have, that obviously help you to run Microsoft workload. If you're running a Windows server, if you're running SQL Server, there are a lot of also obviously commercial aspects. But I also really want to highlight that it's not only about Windows. It's really about embracing also open source technologies. I mentioned before, over 50% of the virtual machines running on Azure today are already based on Linux. Actually, Linux is growing extremely fast. But then what is also really special, and I think that again shows this great partnership between SAP and Microsoft, is that we're also having very dedicated resources for SAP and also some other purpose-built scenarios. But especially for SAP, we obviously have customers that are not only running, I don't know, a 10 terabyte of HANA instance, but they really need much bigger environments that have requirements for 24 terabytes for an S4HANA system, or much more for scale-out scenarios. And for this, we not only have our virtual machines that help address customers to address these requirements, but where we also have really purpose-built hardware that is co-located really within our data centers, and that allow you to, first of all, run these huge HANA machines, but then also leverage all the surrounding other Azure services that we talked about. Maybe this can be another virtual machine that runs the application server, but it can also be Azure security functionalities, Azure backup functionalities. So all these other PaaS services that you can combine and leverage then together with this SAP purpose-built solutions. So with this, again, just a call to action. Head over to azure.com/free, sign up for your Azure subscription. Obviously, if you already have an Azure subscription, you can also use this throughout this course. But if you have not done this yet, then do this. This is something that we will use in the upcoming weeks as well. So just get started. The $200 credits for the next 30 days should be more than enough to run through the exercises. And then again, there are a lot of other services that are still for free that you can use even beyond this course. With this, here additional links to get you started. I already mentioned some of them. There are certifications. There are certifications that help you get started with Azure in general, that are also helping you to get really SAP on Azure specific learnings and a certificate in the end. So check out some of these links and continue to learn via these channels. With this, thank you very much for